Hello, this is Camille Fairborn from Michigan State University, and I'd like to welcome you to today's CAUSE Teaching and Learning webinar. We're pleased to have as our presenters today two colleagues from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Department of Biostatistics. Dr. Todd Schwartz is a research associate professor there, and Dr. Jane Monaco is a clinical associate professor and the director of undergraduate studies. For today's webinar, they will give a presentation entitled "A Study on the Current State of the Use of Online/Flipped Classroom Pedagogy in Statistics and Biostatistics." The way the webinars work is that all listeners are muted during the webinar. You can ask questions at any time by typing them into the questions box. We'll be sure to ask those questions towards the end and give the presenter a chance to respond. You can also use the chat box if you are having any technical questions. At this point, I'll turn things over to Dr. Monaco. Jane, go ahead.
Thank you. We're eager to share some results from a study that we've done about flipped and online classrooms for instructors who are teaching statistics and biostatistics. We're going to start out and tell you a little bit about the survey that we did, the methodology, and what we were hoping to gain, what we were hoping to understand better. And then the results of the survey, we will talk about the overall results, followed by splitting it into some subgroups, people who've had more or less teaching experience, what we found comparing, say, instructors who teach health sciences majors versus non, etc. And then we will wrap up, and we are eager to answer your questions. So online classrooms, flipped classrooms, they're gaining in popularity. We've all seen that there are more and more online classrooms being offered. We've seen the literature expand involving this pedagogy, and many of us are being asked to teach in online classrooms or have been interested in what is a flipped classroom, what's a hybrid classroom. Thus far, much of the literature has been case studies where people talk about their experience, and this is what I did, this is how it worked. And we were interested in something a little broader. We were interested in, in general, what are people doing? What do they find effective? We were interested in, for people who are using these pre-recorded lectures, teaching their online or hybrid classrooms, what software they were using. And so we set about to answer those questions. So, as I said, to our knowledge, we think that most of the literature out there consists of case studies, and we haven't really seen data being collected overall on statistics and biostatistics instructors, what they're doing as far as online pedagogy, what they're doing in the hybrid classroom, what did they find useful, and what software they're using. So we did a survey, and we are going to share with the results. So we wanted to ask instructors of biostatistics and statistics classes, what worked for you? What would you recommend to a colleague? So our survey had started out with collecting some overall information about these instructors, and then we asked them about a specific course that they were teaching in this format, and we collected information about that. And we wanted to address this gap to try and figure out what are people doing in this online classroom when they're teaching statistics and biostatistics courses. Our survey was done in Qualtrics. We did it last year about this time. We sent it to two sections in the American Statistical Association, the Stat Ed section and the Teaching Statistics and Health Sciences section. You can see there's lots of folks in that section. In these two sections, there is some overlap, and we're not familiar, we're not aware of any results on what the overlap is, but the expectation was that someone who completed our survey would only do it once. So we sent this Qualtrics survey out to these two sections in the ASA, and we were looking for teachers who had taught at least one statistics or biostatistics course that uses a pre-recorded lecture. We had 65 respondents, but that was because of missing data, some people who did not respond about whether they used the online format, et cetera, or didn't complete the survey to the extent that the data were meaningful. We're going to be reporting today on a sample size of 46 statistics or biostatistics instructors. These are people who reported having used pre-recorded lectures, and they are doing it in a completely online format or perhaps a hybrid format or a flip format. So as I mentioned, we first asked them overall about their courses, their experience, who are we talking to? So what we found was among those 46 that this is an experienced group. Their average year of teaching any kind of statistics or biostatistics, on average, it was 13 years. And then we asked them, how many years have you been teaching using this online or flipped format? And again, pretty experienced for this up-and-coming format, about 4.5 on average years for people who are using an online or flipped format. And then we asked them to select one of the courses they were teaching in this format. We said, think about a particular course. And what format is that course taught in? And about 50% said that that course that they were going to complete the rest of the survey about, that was a completely online course. But then there were 37% who said it was in a flipped format where the lectures were pre-recorded, but then it had some kind of in-class component. And 13% said that it was what we would call a hybrid format, some online, some in-class. And so the rest of the results are going to be about a specific course that these instructors were thinking about that uses pre-recorded lectures. We asked them, who is the class primarily taken by? And a pretty even split here. Lots of statistics and biostatistics instructors teaching graduate students, lots of them teaching undergraduate students. We asked them about the class size of the course that they were going to, that they were specifically asked about. And again, a pretty even distribution here, moderate sized classes, but some big ones and also some small sized classes. And then we asked them how they would characterize this statistics course that they were going to be answering the rest of the questionnaire about. And the vast majority was this intro stat, this first semester statistics. So 76% of the classes that they're going to be talking about in these later questions are intro stat, but some of them are teaching second level stat or maybe a special topics course. We asked them about the meeting schedule. So for those who were online, the meeting schedule is no in-class component, but for those who are doing the hybrid or the flip format, we asked them, how often do you meet? Some of them 1 day a week, 2 days a week, and other formats as well, other numbers of days a week as well. And then we asked them about these pre-recorded lectures. We said, where are you getting them from? Whose lectures are they? And the majority said that I exclusively use recordings that I created myself. So 58% said that they are recording their own and using their own. About 28% said that they're using some recordings that they did themselves, but as well as some other recordings that they get from other places. And a small number said that they use recordings completely recorded by somebody else. And that somebody else can be, we found a previous instructor, say, or ones they are access online, like Khan Academy lectures. But many people are recording their own lectures and using those exclusively. We asked them, okay, you're using these pre-recorded lectures. What are these pre-recorded lectures? What are you doing in these pre-recorded lectures? What does this look like? And for this particular question, we said, answer all that apply. And many of them said that what their lectures, their pre-recorded lectures are like, is this narration over slides. So it's using PowerPoint, but then using audio over it. That is the majority of them are like that. Many people are using screen capture, where they use a stylus and you're able to see what the professor, what the instructor is writing on the slides or writing elsewhere, let's say even in the software. Some people use a video recording of the person delivering the lecture, so it can be just someone standing in front of a board doing their lecture. Some people use their pre-recorded lectures to do software demonstrations, and then people do other things also. Again, this was select all that you could apply, so people are doing lots of different things and they could pick more than one. So once the instructor pulls that lecture time out of the classroom, what are they using lecture time for? And we asked them, we gave them some things to choose from, and then we also asked them free response. What are you using your class time for? And again, they can answer more than one of these. So class time is being used for lots of different, varied, and productive things. They're using software in the classroom. Even though the pre-recorded lectures are outside the classroom, they are also still lecturing in class, many of them. Hand calculation problems are certainly something that is still being included in classroom time. Small groups. Other things that are done during this classroom time are group projects, presentations, clicker questions, etc. And we also ask our respondents, thinking about this one class that you've picked out that uses pre-recorded lectures, what technology are you using for your lecture recording? And by far, the most commonly used software technology for recording lectures is Camtasia. Other software is being used, as you can see. And we also gave them the opportunity to say other software that they used, and here are some of the technologies in addition that professors are using for the pre-recorded lectures and also just as part of their classroom instruction. And I'll hand it off to my colleague, Todd Schwartz, to talk about some more of our results.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Todd Schwartz, and I'm eager to share with you some of the findings that we have in terms of instructor attitudes about these particular formats. And what I have on this slide is some overall results for responses to questions about how these different aspects in a flipped or online setting compared to teaching a similar course but using a traditional format. And the respondents rated this on a scale from 1 to 5, where 1 was much worse than a traditional format, 5 was much better than a traditional format, and that middle value of 3 would be about the same as a traditional format. Along the bottom of the graph, you can see the different questions that we asked. So we asked about the instructor's time commitment and whether that was reasonable. We also asked a similar question about the student's time commitment. We asked about student resistance. Sometimes we hear that some issues or challenges around students taking these classes online or in a flipped format is that they resist the format. They would rather be sitting in an audience and having the instructor simply lecture to them. So we wanted to measure attitudes about student resistance. Also asking questions about the student achievement, whether students achieve the desired learning outcomes, whether students are engaged, and whether students are satisfied. And what we see on this particular graph, you can see the means of these different ratings. You can see they all hover around 3, which is saying that they're about the same. So none of them seem much worse, none of them seem much better, although you can see the higher rated items are those around student achievement, student engagement, and student satisfaction. So we also asked a question. Sorry, we're trying to advance slides here. So there we go, thank you. We asked a similar set of questions, but this was around recommendations that those instructors would give to their teaching colleagues. So we asked for these 5 different items whether they would strongly recommend against, which is the worst response, up to strongly recommending for, which was the best response, with that middle category being neither recommend for nor against. So that would be a response of 3. And again, along the bottom of the graph, you can see the different items that we had them rate. So whether they would recommend the use of a fully online course as an effective instructional tool, whether they would recommend the use of a partially online course as an effective instructional tool, whether they would recommend the use of a flipped classroom as an effective instructional tool, and then questions about whether they would recommend the use of video recordings, as well as whether they would recommend the use of in-class activities, and by that we meant active learning techniques. And again, you can see that while the use of fully online was around that mean of 3, meaning a neutral sort of recommendation, we saw relatively higher ratings, mean ratings, and especially as we get to the right-hand side of this graph, dealing with recommendation of active learning, we can see that we have a mean rating between 4 and 5, and so endorsement by these instructors. So those were the overall results. We also pre-specified some subgroups that we thought were of interest based on some of the other information that we collected. So we pre-specified these 6 subgroups that are on the screen. And we also conducted some hypothesis tests to compare the groupings. In each case, we conducted or constructed these subgroups into 2 groups, so we are pooling some categories, and we will indicate any statistical significance at the 05 level by an asterisk on the following slides. So the first subgroup has to do with level of teaching experience. So we dichotomized into less than 10 years versus 10 or more years, and you can see we have a fairly even split of the sample size. When we look at their responses to comparing aspects of the flipped or online course to traditional, you can see that we have blue bars representing those with 10 or more years of experience, and the orange bars corresponding to those with less than 10 years. And there are no asterisks on this particular slide indicating that none of these differences were statistically significant. So we're tending to see the same kind of relationships as what we saw in the overall results. Similar kinds of results when we look at their recommendations to colleagues. So again, we see some slight differences. It looks like those who have less than 10 years of experience are tending to have slightly higher means, but none of those are statistically significant. The second subgroup was looking by major, and we dichotomized into health sciences majors versus other majors, and we have a sample size split of 24 and 21 here. Again, the blue bars representing the health sciences majors and the orange bars representing other majors. And you can see that we do have an asterisk here. On the right-hand side, we actually do have a significant difference at the 05 level in terms of student satisfaction. And what we can see here is that we have a significantly higher level of satisfaction for those that are teaching to health sciences majors than to other majors. When it comes to the recommendations, while we do have some discrepancies in these bars, none of these are statistically significant. For the next subgroup, we looked at the type of course, and so we dichotomized this into introductory statistics versus other. And in this particular case, we have a little bit more discrepant sample size. We have 35 that were teaching to introductory statistics and only 11 in these others. You can see the blue bars represent the introductory statistics and the orange bars the other. It does seem that the orange bars tend to be slightly higher, representing those increased means, but no statistical significance as we look across these different items. If we look at the same information, but for the recommendations to colleagues, again, although we see certain items that have a slightly higher mean for the blue bars and others with a slightly higher mean for the orange bars. None of these are statistically significant. If we look at the level of the student, we dichotomize this according to undergraduate students versus other. And again, we have a fairly even split here. Again, the blue bars representing the non-undergraduates and the orange representing the undergraduates. We again have a statistically significant result on the item dealing with student satisfaction. So we can see that we have a significantly higher mean for the non-undergraduates relative to the undergraduates in terms of student satisfaction. When it comes to recommendations to colleagues, you can see the results here, and none are statistically significant. The next subgroup that we were interested in is looking at results by class size. So we dichotomize this according to less than 50 students versus 50 or more students. And we have a sample size split here of 33 versus 13. The blue bar representing the bigger class sizes, 50 plus, and the orange representing less than 50 students. Again, you can see some fluctuation across these, but none are statistically significant. When we look at instructor recommendations to colleagues, we do have a statistically significant result when it comes to the use of the flipped classroom, and so a greater endorsement or recommendation by instructors of the larger class sizes relative to smaller for that particular one. And then the last subgroup that we were interested in looking at is perhaps the most interesting, and that's looking at this by the type of format that the instructor reports using. So those that are teaching online versus those using the flipped classroom. And for this particular subgroup, we actually eliminated the category of those who said that they were teaching using a partially online course. So this is only those teaching completely online versus those teaching using a flipped format. And here you can see the blue bar is representing instructors of flipped classrooms, while the orange bar is representing those teaching online. What you see here is that we have two asterisks reflecting statistical significance, both in terms of student achievement and student engagement. And in both cases, those were significantly higher for those using the flipped format relative to those teaching online. And then the last slide showing results here is in terms of how these instructors would recommend these methods to colleagues. And interesting what we see on the left-hand side, that first asterisk is indicating that we have a statistical difference. Those who report teaching online would recommend the use of a fully online course. If you go to the third set of bars, we see the opposite, where those who are teaching using a flipped format would recommend the use of that flipped format. And then on the right-hand side, we have a third statistical finding there, significantly different, where it is higher for those using a flipped format than online in terms of the endorsement of active learning. The other thing I want to point out about this particular slide, and we don't have any formal hypothesis testing to go along with this, but especially if we look at the first and third set of bars where we're looking at fully online versus flipped, you can see that the means for those that are teaching online, in other words, those orange bars, are relatively similar across those. So that reflects the fact that those teaching online would tend to recommend both a fully online or a flipped classroom to relatively the same degree. But if you look at the corresponding blue bars for each of those, you can see a big jump in terms of those who teach the flipped classroom and use that format in terms of their endorsement of that format. So in conclusion, we're hopeful that these findings are of interest and provide some insight into the current state of how online and flipped classrooms might be used in statistics and biostatistics. We're hoping that this can be informative for instructors who might be considering the implementation of such methods, getting a sense of what others are doing. And also we hope that it illustrates the wide variety of the way that these methods are used, that it's not just something that can only be used for a certain type of course, for a certain topic, for a certain type of major, and so on, but it really runs the gamut. So we'd also like to acknowledge we have a graduate student who's been helping a lot with this work and is using this for her master's paper. So we'd like to acknowledge and thank Liz Ajazi for her help with this. And at this time, we'd like to open it up for any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Well, thanks both Todd and Jane for that presentation. If you have some questions for our presenters, please go ahead and type them in the questions box, and I will relay those questions to them. I had a question for you. I'm wondering how much of your, or what proportion of the classes you guys are teaching there at UNC are you using either an online or a flipped format for those?
Hi, this is Jane. So personally, I'm teaching one flipped classroom and an online class that I teach several times a year. But we run the gamut. We've got them. Just depends on the student population and what the needs are for that semester. But I've been involved in lots of different formats.
Just to answer one question, I can do that one. Atul Roy is asking, would the recording be available? And yes, that will. This recording will go up on the CausWeb website pretty shortly after the presentation is finished. So you both have taught in these online formats. I guess the thing that kind of struck me with those recommendations and the differences between the online and the flipped, it seems like people are eager to recommend what they're actually doing. And I'm wondering how much of that do you guys think is just people thinking that what they're doing is working as opposed to actually recommending them?
So this is Todd, yes. And that might be hard for us to tease out. I think it's encouraging if people are recommending these formats so that it supports their use. However, there could be some of these instructors that are using both methods and might have some strong feelings. Also, there certainly could have been instructors who maybe are assigned to teach using a certain format, and if they're not really sold on that particular format, that could have been reflected in their recommendations, a negative recommendation as well. But I think given the increasing prevalence of these courses, I think there is some positive feedback, and I think especially for those who might be considering a flipped format where there's not necessarily the need to have a certain platform and go fully online. There are certainly encouraging signs here for that.
We have one more question from Gail Tudor. She says, did you try dichotomizing class size differently, say 30 versus more than 30, to see if the results differed from using the really large class sizes of, say, 50?
We did not look at a different dichotomy for that. The reason for some of the dichotomizations that we use was probably more driven by making sure we had enough sample size, but certainly we could do something exploratory and maybe having less focus on the hypothesis testing to see whether there might be differences for say a different dichotomization, so that when we talk about small class sizes, it could be the smaller ones.
Okay. Mark is asking, which pedagogy is more time consuming? Do you guys have opinions about that?
Well, I guess the question where we actually did ask about how instructors felt about their time and their time commitment, because what we tried to identify in the different instructor attitudes that we asked about were some of these hot topics and some of the issues that people might either promote or look negatively upon certain methods. So I talked a little bit about this issue of student resistance, but certainly thinking about instructor time. Now, if you look, and I'm not sure if you can go back to the first slide that showed the bar graphs, but we'll try to get back there. But on that particular slide where we asked about the instructor time commitment, it was not, it rated between a 2 and a 3, and a 2 was somewhat worse than traditional format, and a 3 was about the same. So it wasn't substantially below that neutral value. Now, what you have to keep in mind is that we don't know how instructors were responding to this question, whether they thought about it over the long term, because sometimes when you develop these courses, it does take a tremendous amount of time, but then you can get some time savings over the long run if you're able to recycle some of that material over the second year and third year and so on.
I would agree with that in my experience, that you can kind of offload some of your teaching to previous versions of yourself by doing what you were saying with the recycling.
Here's the slide that we were talking about, and that's the first bar on the left-hand side, where we actually asked about how instructors rated their time commitment and whether they consider that to be reasonable, again, rated against a similar course using a traditional format.
Okay. Well, again, thank you to both of you for your presentation today, and thanks to all of you for attending. I'd like to encourage you all to register for and attend ECOTS, which is coming up in May, and to keep an eye on CosWeb or your email for webinars during the coming summer months. Thanks again for being here, and have a great day.